Welcome back to another episode of I Wish They Knew, a show where we share big ideas that deserve more attention in about the time it takes to enjoy a cup of coffee. I'm Joe Hirsch. Today's wish comes from Jennifer Moss. Jen is an international speaker, award-winning journalist and author, a workplace culture strategist, and the co-founder of the Work Better Institute, a global workforce policy think tank. Jennifer has shared all of her thought leadership across the popular press and in 3 books, one of which, Unlocking Happiness at Work, recently released a 10th anniversary edition. Happy anniversary, fully revised and updated and even better than before. Jen, welcome to the show.
I'm so happy to be here, Joe. Thanks for having me.
So what do you wish more people knew?
I wish more people knew that we aren't in the future of work right now, that we are in the multiverse of work. If you're a Marvel fan, it isn't this idea that we would be on this trajectory of just going as we were without the disruption of the pandemic, and that resilience is about taking something that we went through and rebounding from it. And if we completely try to just push the pandemic aside, we won't actually develop real resiliency and learn from it. And that strategies that are just trying to jam the toothpaste back in the tube, or, focusing on this new normal desire, to get things back to normal, is actually the wrong approach. That we need to be really doubling down on well-being and the humanity of work today more than we ever have before. And that's actually making sure that we are remembering what's happened in the last 5 years instead of trying to forget it.
Yeah, and making sure that those become drivers of more happiness in the workplace, would you say?
Yeah, I think that has been the big problem, is that there's a lot of leaders and organizations or employers scratching their heads going, I don't understand why there's the lowest engagement we've seen, or that productivity is low. And they're using old tools to try to fix it instead of saying, how do we actually make a difference here? And I say old tools because I wrote Unlocking Happiness at Work 10 years ago, and I say the same things 10 years later, and we're still not recognizing that well-being and happiness leads to the most incredible business outcomes, and that we can measure happiness and that we can demonstrate the ROI of it. But people still have a hard time, I'm seeing, in investing in that and making that their strategic priority.
Happiness isn't just a pursuit. It's really a practice. And it's a practice that's built through daily habits and routines. And you introduce a model for how to build those habits that stick, those happiness habits. And you have a great little acronym for that, PERSIST. Can you give us a drive-by of how to build better habits that actually stick?
This is an important, I think, distinction, and something that I have been really focused on in sort of the training in organizations and the leadership development. It's often that I would go into an organization and it's about an overhaul. When I first started out, it was like, let's add happiness as one of our values. And, it was just so quickly forgotten because people don't have time for an overhaul. They need incremental change. Managers need to be able to do this. And I say culture can be changed and improved in 20 minutes per week or less. And that's how we do it. And that's how we get people on board. Persist is really about building these traits of psychological safety and making people feel like they can be their authentic selves, just making people feel like they can fit in and stand out all at the same time. And that's belonging. We want to, increase engagement, but that really is this sense of feeling like I matter, feeling like that what I'm doing has some sort of value, which we've seen a lot of people disconnect from work, which leads to burnout. It's relationships. We rarely see a strategic plan around building friendships at work. And that has really changed in the last 5 years. And I don't blame that on hybrid or remote work. I blame that on time poverty. We aren't spending any time together. And that's a real issue. The fourth part of the acronym is strengths, just making sure that people are actually doing what they're meant to be doing, and increasing that, that connection to feeling like what I do is valuable, but that I also feel like I am connected to the mission using my strengths. Then there's impact. making sure that the things that you do as an organization have the kind of impact that feels mission driven and connected to those, especially our younger cohorts who want to be invested in something that leaves a higher impact. It's about self-care. So, we have to recognize that there's institutional stressors that are going to create our burnout, but we have to, as leaders, model self-care, because employees can't be what they can't see. And then finally, it's trust. Trust is fundamental. We've seen a massive erosion of trust. We're seeing, again, the Edelman Trust Index go down again. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why, I'm describing this, and others have described this as the great betrayal. There was all these promises made in 2020 and 2021 about well-being and DEI and investment and all of these things that have been clawed back. And now people are resistant. They don't trust. And that's why engagement and productivity are so low.
It's like we kind of forgot the things that should be working and probably can still be working, and just went back to how things were before. It's like this thing never happened.
Right. And that is dangerous, in my opinion, because we're not looking at the dialectical theory, which I always love, is this both and statement. Two things can be true at the same time. The pandemic was traumatic for a lot of people. We had secondary grief if we didn't have primary grief. The whole world collectively faced their mortality, which was psychologically triggering in pro and con, ways. But what we're not recognizing is that it also led to some really big changes that I think are critical. We're talking more about burnout. We're talking more about the value of being happy at work. People care more about purpose than they ever have before. We're seeing a rise of hopelessness, which is a really big issue, but we're also finding that people became very pro-social from the pandemic. And they also became really good at being cognitively flexible. We were able to pivot in so many ways. And instead of remembering that and saying, wow, we were powerful, we were amazing, we did incredible things, like pat ourselves on the back for being epic, we're ignoring those things too. So we need a both and here, so we can bring things forward and then we can let go of things that just aren't working anymore.
Yeah, so you mentioned burnout, and that's very well documented as a happiness killer. But there's another part of that, and it's bore out, the sense that we're just not really stimulated on the job. So, two-part question here. First, what is the role of leaders in making work more stimulating? I mean, it is called work for a reason, but are there things that leaders can do to help create a sense of engagement and purpose on the job? And then number two, what could leaders do for individuals whose roles involve inherently repetitive tasks?
No, I love the research on job crafting, this idea that we can take the tasks of our job and connect them to something that's meaningful in our lives. We have these big terminal goals, but we also have these daily actions that lead to those terminal goals. And sometimes it's subconscious, but often it is within the leader's purview to be able to get that from us so that they can attach more meaning to the day-to-day work. Most people aren't really attached to some sort of mission statement. They're more focused on, how is this aligning with who I am? One of the interesting things that's happened in the last few years, as I was really promoting the burnout epidemic, I was traveling a lot, and I ended up speaking to over 100 Uber drivers, and I interviewed and recorded about 103 conversations. And so many of them did not like driving. They hated driving, which is super ironic, right? That's what they do all day long. And when I asked them, what did they like about the job? It was all these other things, flexibility. It was getting to talk to people. There was quite a few people that had left their remote jobs, and they quit. One was a principal that quit to become a bus driver, an Uber driver. I mean, we saw lots of different reasons for it. It was to, pay can be that reason that you're stimulated if it's attached to something meaningful. For a lot of people, it was to be able to put their kids in better schools, or own a better home in a better neighborhood. So it's really about leaders being able to give permission to managers to find out exactly what are those things that people care about, and then say, oh, well, this task, actually what you do every day, aligns with that value. And it's not about the work, it's not about the driving, it's about all those secondary and tertiary things that make work a good place and a stimulating place to be.
So even if you're a frontline worker, or if your job doesn't necessarily lend itself to creativity or flexibility, there are still ways for the individual contributor to tie the work to something much larger than the work itself.
Yeah. And sometimes it can be just even having one friend at work that's your ally. I mean, they did this test within these warehouses where they found that at first they had this strict policy on not talking to one another because they were worried about safety issues. And then instead they created a buddy system and you were able to autonomously sort of choose who you liked working with, who was your buddy. And then they found that the safety risks considerably declined because you had each other's back, and they described the day going faster, that they could talk and kibitz and have fun on the job and do lots of things that, that made work fun. And so it's not necessarily about the task even being that much more exciting. It's about the experience of work being that much more enjoyable. And so you see that quite frequently. We see that in nurses, for example, where there's high friendships or close friendships, there's better morale. When we see the ability to have, even just lunch, even just having lunch 20 minutes per week. And this was a Cornell study where they found that 20 minutes of having lunch once a week with firefighters, and they did an A/B testing, firefighters actually had less safety risks as well. And that morale was higher, that they enjoyed their job, that there was higher retention. So it's about thinking about those other kind of squishy parts of the job and realizing that they're more important than just those connecting to the mission, the things that you're doing every single day.
Yeah. So not just the work itself, but the larger work experience.
Exactly. And that can be transformational, and it can really change your mood. It can make you feel like going to work you get excited to be at work. You want to show up to work. You also start to care more about your peers. And so you go above and beyond. There's different shorthand. So work is more efficient. I mean, and then when work is more efficient and you see more success, you get more positive feedback because you're more productive and you're more successful and you're more likely to get promoted. So it's this virtuous circle that I think is what is so important about thinking about, work in a much more experiential way than just what you're doing every single day.
We've been told that the key to happiness at work is striking some sort of work-life balance. But for many people, that just simply hasn't panned out. And there's even been reporting, even in today's Wall Street Journal, we were talking about this offline, that numerous companies, some very high-profile organizations, Shopify, Google, McKinsey, just to name a few, are now telling applicants to pretty much give up on the idea of any sort of balance and to sign up for a grind. You talk about treating work and life as allies, which I thought was an interesting way to put the challenge. Tell us what you mean by that.
For me, it's recognizing again that in the last 6 years, we've really changed. And a lot of what people recognize, and this happens when you face your mortality, is there's a psychological trigger that says, I want more purpose in my life because I see a sense of urgency, and that legacy becomes more important, that if my life isn't satisfying, then what am I doing here? So we have this constant time discounting and querying that's happening in our head very subconsciously. And the science of it is so fascinating. But what is important for organizations to understand is that right now, we see this lack of mobility for employees to be able to make these choices of just saying, hey, it's going to be a grind. But we're already seeing our younger cohorts opting out of this standard style of work, that they're finding different ways, that they're willing to take less pay, considerable less pay, like 37% less pay for more work-life balance. We're seeing the thinnest executive pipeline for women that we've ever seen before. Women are actually increasing the number of patents. They're increasing the number of startup activity. They're abandoning this idea of a grind. And we're also seeing mature workers retire early. And so it might seem like, okay, we're going to have AI and these other automated ways of supplying that lack of labor. But I actually feel like in 5 years right now, we're going to see another real shift of that great resignation that's happening. And people aren't just going to flip to another job. It's not going to be a reshuffle, that people are just going to say it's not worth it. And so this short-sighted kind of mindset of, okay, I'm going to just not offer those things that people want, and I'm going to tell people it's going to be a grind, take it or leave it, might work for right now, but it's not going to work in the long run. And so if we really want to develop our talent pipeline, if we really want to retain people, and if we really want to bring everyone into the fold, especially that younger workforce that's going to make up 30% of the workforce soon, we need a better idea. And right now, I think that it's a very short-sighted idea around how we can really think about the whole person at work. And if we don't, they'll opt out. And that's going to have a big impact on business.
The book is Unlocking Happiness at Work, and the author, and she's unlocked a few big ideas here for us today, is Jennifer Moss. Jen, thanks for sharing your wish with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It always gives me great happiness to spend time with you, Joe.